Hey there everyone, it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today for a new video. I love working with embossing folders because they're such a versatile tool in your craft room that can be used in so many different ways. Today I'm going to be sharing 3 different techniques that are a way to allow you to step up your embossed designs and really add some wow factor. In today's project, I'm going to be using embossing folders from our Simon Says stamp collection. And the first one we'll be working with is Floral Festoon. Now you'll notice the embossing folders have 2 sides. One is raised and then the other is debossed into the embossing folder. Depending on which side you use, you're going to get different results. And I'm going to show you the first technique, in which case we're going to add embossing ink onto the raised side of the folder. Gently tap that onto those raised surfaces and put your cardstock in on the other side of the folder. Carefully press that ink on top of the paper. And without shifting the paper, we're going to run this through our die cut machine to emboss the pattern. So now we have this beautiful floral design pressed into our paper, and all of those recessed areas are now covered with embossing ink. That means we can add embossing powder on top of that ink, and it's going to allow us to get a really beautiful embossed design inside of those recessed areas. I'm using a clear sparkle glitter embossing powder from Wow. You don't have to use this glitter powder. You can use anything you want. The reason we're using embossing powder for this is because it's going to resist any ink that we're going to add on top. So now that you've applied all your powder, I'm taking a heat tool and I'm going to set this. And of course, this is a clear powder, so it's a little bit harder to tell once it's set. You'll be able to see it in person though. It'll turn a really nice shiny finish instead of that matte color. Once I emboss the entire panel, you can see we have that beautiful glazing inside of those embossed areas. We can now add ink on top of this paper, and like I said, it will resist any of the ink that we put on top. So I'm going to use Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated Inks. I've picked out a couple of colors in purple and blue, and using a blending brush, I'm going to ink blend some color onto this background. If you have any ink that sits on top of those embossed designs, don't worry about it. We're going to be able to buff that off after we're done all of our ink blending. So I'm just covering this background with some really pretty colors. And now I'm going to take a cloth and just go over every single flower and buff off any ink that might be sitting on top. Revealing that beautiful embossed design, now we have this really cool resist. Let's try another technique. On the raised areas of my embossing folder, I'm very carefully tapping some Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink. On the other side of the folder, I'm going to put my paper and then lay that ink on top of my cardstock, fold up this embossing folder and run it through to emboss the design into the paper. So now we have those leaves pressed into the paper, just like we did for the other project, but this time they are now colored instead of clear embossing ink. Now we're going to take an ink pad, and this technique I like to call ink dragging. This is almost like a double inked background. It's really cool. We're very carefully, without pressing too hard, applying ink on top of this cardstock. And because those leaves are pressed into the paper, it's a lot harder for the ink to get into those little nooks and crannies. So that's allowing us to get this really cool colored leaves, and now we have a colored background because we're dragging the ink very carefully across the paper. Now you'll have some spots where it might transfer into the recessed areas, but it's pretty good and it allows you to get this really cool double ink effect. I like to step things up a little bit by adding some splatters. You'll notice I added some water splatters onto the paper and then some splatters of ink. Now you don't have to do this. I'll show you another rendition that I did with more of a two-toned color effect. I used 2 different colors of blues, and so this one's a little bit more monochromatic, whereas the other one has that nice contrast of the pink and purple. So that's 2 different ways you can do this. It's a really cool technique and provides you a really unique effect. Now, I have another idea that is super fun and perfect for the holidays. So I'm pulling out our Simon Says Stamp Terrific Adhesive Sheets, and I'm going to cover a piece of white cardstock with one side of that adhesive. So this is a double-sided adhesive sheet. We're going to lay that adhesive on top of our white cardstock, and now we're going to put this entire piece into our embossing folder. Now, because I want the pattern to be raised on my paper, I'm going to make sure that I lay my cardstock on the raised side of the folder and then close the impressed side on top. So now that leaves us with an embossed pattern, and we're going to remove the release paper off of our cardstock. So now we've exposed the adhesive that is attached to our white cardstock, and that's going to allow us to put glitter on top of this background. So I'm just using a silvery white glitter here. This one has a really unique color tone. It's from Wow. It's not available anymore, but you can use any clear or silver glitter for this. And I just burnished it into the adhesive. And then once I have that adhesive covered with the glitter, you'll see here we have this gorgeous glitter paper design. And it almost looks like stamped metal. It looks really, really neat. I put this onto a white card base, and I'm going to add a few snowflakes on top to really embellish this. So I used a white and also a silver snowflake. And this embossing folder happens to be our glistening snowflakes folder from Simon Says Stamp, and it comes with the dies. So you can create this really cool effect with the set of embossing folders and dies. To finish off this card, I brought in a Merry Word die. This also has the shadow, which we'll be using, and I've die cut it from white cardstock. After die cutting, I covered the entire bottom half of the word with glue and then sprinkled on some silver glitter to create a dip dyed effect. This will match nicely with the silver snowflake we have on this background. I just used some vellum for the shadow layer, and then I'm going to pop this entire sentiment up onto my card. This card is super simple, but packs an entirely amazing punch with that gorgeous glitter effect. I just love how this turned out. So much depth and sparkle, it's super pretty. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how I finished up the cards for all the other backgrounds. For the leafy background, I made 2 cards, of course, because we had the pink and purple and also the blue cards, and I'm turning both of these into edge-to-edge shakers. I'm covering the backside of each panel with red line tape from Simon Says Stamp and removing the release paper from 3 sides only to start. This will allow me to fold over some plastic into that adhesive. The plastic that I'm using is from some stamp packaging. I just cut that down and reused it, so it ends up not going in the trash, but rather I get to recycle it, so that's good. And I'm just going to fold that plastic over the edges of my paper and into the adhesive, and this is forming a pocket that we can then fill with sequins. I'm going to do the exact same process for both cards, and I'll just change up the sequins that go inside of each one. I use this really pretty mix of sequins from Simon Says Stamp. And by the way, all the products that I use today are listed below in the video description or on the blog. So if you want to know exactly what things I use to make all of these cards, you can find all that information there. So after I filled up the shakers, I just folded that last edge over into the adhesive, and then ta-da! We have these super pretty shaker cards that have a lot of gorgeous texture and fun pattern to them because of the inking technique that we used. On the pink card, I used this really cool large scripty big hugs die. I die cut it from some silver cardstock. This is silver glitter cardstock from Simon. The final embellishment that I added was this cute little gumdrop heart that I had in my stash from Tim Holtz. I had colored it at one point with some pink alcohol ink, so it matched really nicely with my background, and that was the perfect finishing touch for this card. The blue card, I made it actually more of a Christmassy themed card. I put some frosty colored sequins inside of my shaker card, and then the sentiment I used was a Rejoice greeting from our Simon Says Stamp Rejoice die set. And I cut that from some matte silver cardstock. So that's a really pretty color that matched really nicely with the colors in this card. For an additional sentiment, I did pull in some sentiment strips. This is from the Reverse Christmas set. It's a new sentiment strip pack from Simon. And I just used some foam tape to pop that up underneath the word Rejoice. On the card that we did, the heat embossed background, I'm going to use one of those glistening snowflakes from the other embossing folder set that we used, and I'm going to glue that right into the center top portion of my card. With the word peace, I die cut it from 2 different colors of cardstock twice, and I'm going to stack them together to form a dimensional sentiment, but the sentiment features the same 2 colors that I used in the background. So I used a blue cardstock and a lavender color cardstock, and that's going to match up really nicely. This will also give some contrast to the edges of the sentiment and allow it to pop up off of this card really well. I really liked how that piece was so pretty in the purple and matched up really nicely with those colors. So with a bit of foam tape, I just popped that up off of my snowflake, And to make things a little bit more dimensional, I'm going to lift the edges of the snowflake up, kind of curling them up a little bit so it stands off. And I did tuck some of the edges of the snowflakes on the sides around the word piece. That helps them give a little bit more lift too. So this card is almost done, but I did add a few sequins from a sequin pack that I had in my stash from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm just going to glue those around the snowflake for a little bit of sparkle. It didn't need much because this background is so beautiful and the piece and snowflake really take center stage, and I just love how this glimmers in the light. It's so pretty. So there you have it, 3 new ideas for how you can use embossing folders with some other products that you have in your stash, whether it's ink and embossing powder, or maybe some of your dye inks and you're creating a two-toned inked effect, or adding a bit of glitter. I love the glitter for the holidays, and those terrific adhesive sheets were so much fun to emboss so that we could add that really cool glitter effect on top. I think that is such a fun way to add some sparkle for the holidays. And the best part is that the adhesive holds the glitter so well it doesn't flake off. So you're really not going to have a mess with the card like that. Well, I hope you were inspired today. I hope that these ideas were helpful and that you are going to try them out in your next embossed projects. So definitely be sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I'll be back soon with more to share with you all, but until then, I hope you have a fabulous day.